For about 100 years, starting in the mid-1800s until the mid-1900s, streetcars were a common sight in cities across North America. Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. would have significant systems spanning over hundreds of miles of track. With the rise of private automobiles, buses, and other innovations of road transportation, streetcars began to disappear, some going more quietly than others. As more systems closed their doors or converted to bus-only operations, railfans started capturing what final moments they could of what would become a bygone time. Some railfans, however, went further, establishing a future for these antique electric ponies. The state of Maryland, home of the birthplace of the country's national anthem, and the birthplace of the American Railroad, and also once the home of two of the nation's most prime examples of street railway transportation systems. Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. both had streetcar systems that became the nucleus of everyday commutes for residents across both cities. These two systems would go on to operate for nearly 100 years of service.
The history of the streetcars in Baltimore dates back to shortly after the Civil War, with the creation of a horse-drawn streetcar system that led to the creation of Baltimore's unique track gauge of 5 feet 4.5 inches, because it was the prevailing gauge or wheel spacing of locally manufactured wagons. In the 1920s, Baltimore's streetcar system started to suffer the effects of competition with the private automobile. The company was bankrupt in the 1930s, reorganized, and then little by little, after World War II, the streetcar system declined until the last streetcars ran in Baltimore in November of 1963. A modified version, if you want to say, the streetcar, light rail transit, returned to Baltimore and to Maryland in the early 1990s.
Streetcars began operating during the Civil War in Washington, and they ran for almost 100 years, just shy of 6 months to January of 1962. So the industry cars kind of really picked up speed after World War II. By that point, you started to have a lot more automobile production was really increasing in the post-war period. People were moving to the suburbs, and streetcar ridership was starting to go down in favor of buses, as well as the planning for the interstate highway system, which disrupted a lot of streetcar networks within cities. In Washington, it was those similar factors, but it was also a transit strike that occurred in the summer of 1955. And for about 28 days, there was no transit service in the city. But when the strike ended, the District of Columbia, which was under the control of Congress, lifted the franchise agreement for Capital Transit and said that whoever purchased the company would have 7 years to convert the streetcar system over to buses. In 1958 was when they really started to convert streetcar lines over to buses. That was beginning with the routes 80 and 82 on North Capitol Street, and then they had another set of abandonments in 1960, which were all the streetcar lines that operated outside of the downtown core area, and then yet another abandonment in 1961 with the closing of the Mount Pleasant line, and then the final two routes in January of '62 were the 14th Street line and the Florida Avenue line.
The end of the streetcar system in Baltimore came about for a couple of reasons. One was the company, the Baltimore Transit Company, was owned by a holding company, which had stockholders that included rubber tire and petroleum interests and other rubber-tired vehicle manufacturers.
Baltimore Transit decided that they wanted buses running all over the city instead of streetcars. It was a long process.
Generally speaking, they were all private companies. They were not transit authorities like we have today. Right after World War II, and Baltimore is a prime example, there was a holding company called National City Lines. And their plan, they would go into a city and say, well, we're going to give you brand new buses. Get rid of these old streetcars. But what they didn't tell you is National City Lines was funded by General Motors. Well, the two main funders were Standard Oil and General Motors.
The goal of National City Lines was never, let's sell buses to ourselves. it was from the get-go, get rid of transit entirely and force the American people into automobiles in order to make money. And they succeeded greatly in Baltimore.
The bus that replaced the PCC car couldn't hold what a PCC car held. Take Joe Smith, the factory worker, goes out on Monday and thinks, I'm gonna get a brand new bus today. Okay, well, the bus comes along and it can't hold all the people, so he can't get on that one. Finally, he gets on maybe the third bus, but he's late for work. But this was all part of the marketing plan. By the end of that week, having been late for work several times, he says, the heck with this. I'm gonna buy a car.
Baltimore's traffic commissioner after World War II, Henry Barnes, believed the solution to traffic woes in Baltimore were one-way streets with free-wheeled traffic, not bound by rails, not bound by overhead wire, that could support moving traffic faster through the city. You also had the challenges of a system which was privately owned at that time. When you look at things like substations, car houses, turning loops for streetcars, all of that is taxable real estate, and was. Until the end of Baltimore's streetcar system, 1 cent of every fare was basically the park tax that paid for Baltimore's park system. Plus, streets on which streetcars operated was all the responsibility of the transit company, or the streetcar operator prior to Baltimore Transit. And what that meant was, by substituting buses, those costs were borne by the city and the taxpayers, not by the public entity.
When they first started doing the abandonments of streetcar lines, they eventually knew that probably one day in the near future, there would not be streetcars operating in Baltimore. And actually, from what I remember learning, was that they wanted all the streetcars off the streets by 1960. But they ended up being 1963 because at that time, Baltimore Transit couldn't afford the new buses to replace the streetcars. But on November the 3rd, 1963, this very car that we're sitting on was the last streetcar to turn a wheel on the streets of Baltimore.
Preservation of Baltimore streetcars has a very long, somewhat contentious history. It actually started when the streetcar was still the dominant form of transportation in Baltimore. In 1928, the United Railway and Electric, the streetcar operator, assembled a collection of, at that time, older and obsolete streetcars, as well as a few examples of their newest models, for the Baltimore Chamber of Commerce for a parade they called the Parade of Progress. It was based off what happened the previous year, in 1927, when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad did its Fair of the Iron Horse, a parade of replica and older and modern steam locomotives. The idea struck the United, so they assembled this historical collection, including a rubber-tired bus, a horse-drawn streetcar, and then set these aside for what would become a future museum being undefined. That collection itself languished in storage for many years. It survived the Depression, it survived the World War II scrap drives, but it got renewed interest again as Baltimore streetcar system started to be replaced after World War II. It was started to be replaced in earnest in the late 40s. The collection itself by the early 1950s was considered to be a fire hazard for some of the existing streetcar facilities, which often were wooden car houses or car houses with wooden roofs. So they intended to destroy the collection. This got the attention of a group of rail enthusiasts who leaned on the company to save that collection.
And they were turned over to the Maryland Historical Society. From then on, they were shuffled around to different car houses. Eventually, after the streetcars did end service, they were stored in places such as trash collection garages for the trash trucks, different places, and eventually they found a home out at Lake Roland.
Robert E. Lee Park, the now present-day Lake Roland Park, is home to the former Green Spring branch line of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Service on the branch ended in 1962 with the National Capital Historical Museum of Transportation, a group from Washington, D.C., purchasing what remained of the branch to set up a trolley museum. In 1960, the D.C. group and the Streetcar Committee of the National Railroad Historical Society Baltimore chapter began discussions of joining forces to bring both groups' collections of streetcars to Lake Roland. In August of that year, A former Pennsylvania Railroad diesel-electric rail car was purchased to provide a power plant to operate the electric streetcars.
So the original plan for the museum was that we were actually going to go in and open a museum with what is now the Baltimore Streetcar Museum. It was going to be located in, I think, Robert E. Lee Park, but it's up near Lake Roland. And the plan was to operate a dual-gauge streetcar museum with the standard gauge for Washington cars and then a wider gauge for Baltimore. Some of the cars from the Washington collection actually did make their way up to Lake Roland. There's some photographs of the cars either under tarps and sitting in the park with people having picnics around them.
They had started to build a car house, but unfortunately the people that lived around Lake Roland at that time did not want a streetcar museum in their area.
However, the neighbors there did not like the idea of a smoke-belching diesel generator to power the streetcars, nor the idea of streetcars in the neighborhood.
There was a lot of neighborhood opposition to having a streetcar museum close to, I guess, the homes up near Lake Roland. So the community didn't seem like it was all that welcome to having a streetcar museum there. So I think I don't know if they were worried about noise or people coming through there.
We couldn't stay there because we couldn't make our peace with the neighbors and the railroad. The railroad was not going to do anything once the neighbors started talking about going to the Interstate Commerce Commission, because Pennsylvania didn't give permission to abandon the track, and it was just a no-win situation for anybody, except the people who live there.
Under pressure, the two groups began making plans to relocate to more permanent homes. The DC group would end up making its way down to Montgomery County, Maryland.
For some reason, I had to take a taxi cab out here in Maryland. I get in a taxi cab, it's a Barwood. What else in Montgomery County but Barwood? A relative is driving the taxi. And we get to chatting about things, and I'm talking about the streetcar museum. Now, we were still in Baltimore. He said, well, he worked for the Park and Planning Commission. He said, well, the county just bought a whole bunch of land out here. Maybe if you ask them, I'd let you build a streetcar museum. That's a fat chance of that. But I passed it up the line to our officers at the time. Hey, my cousin told me about this land up here. Maybe you can. I said, I'm sure it won't come to anything. But apparently, with that tip, our higher-ups brought to the Park and Planning Commission, and here we are.
The land opened up here in Northwest Branch Park. It was actually designated as a park. It was given over to the county. And so we decided to move down to this location. So we actually had the groundbreaking in 1965 with the museum opening in 1969. DC Transit had already set aside a set of cars to be preserved. I think one was the Silver Sightseer, car number 303, 1053, and I think 1101. So there were already a set of cars that the company had designated that were going to be preserved. At the time, the museum didn't have a location yet. We were still trying to negotiate whether we would be located in the Baltimore area or whether we would be down here closer to Washington. But the cars themselves didn't actually come to the museum until 1970. So at the time, this opportunity opened up, and so it was closer to Washington anyway. And so our museum opened up in 69, and then the Baltimore Museum opened up, pretty shortly after that.
And then in 1966, under the administration of Mayor McKelvin, the Streetcar Museum came to its existing home.
Mayor McKelvin found this area down here, the Jones Falls Valley, and said, hey, this would be the perfect place for a streetcar line. And the Streetcar Museum in 1968 moved down here. The cars that belonged to National Capital naturally went down to the Washington, D.C. area. Baltimore Streetcar Museum went out on its own in 1966.
The museum officially opened to the public on the weekend of July 4th, 1970. At least formal operations began that weekend. And the museum has continued to grow and improve since then. Well, the Roundhouse itself, this is something the museum has contemplated and worked together discussing with the city since the early 1960s to see if that building could be repurposed.
Now the Roundhouse has been there, I'm going to say late 1890s, early 1900s. It was the headquarters for the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad, locally known as the Ma and Pa.
The building itself was purchased by the city around 1960 when the Maryland and Pennsylvania had abandoned 2 years prior its Maryland division. But the city in the 1960s had no capability or interest in transferring the property to the museum.
The city of Baltimore took over the facility to store their snow fighting trucks and equipment. And sadly, they did not maintain the building at all. The whole middle structure is collapsing in on itself. The stone buildings appear to be in good shape, structurally.
As it deteriorated, the city actually came to the museum and said, you know, we'd like to see this structure preserved and saved. We think the Baltimore Streetcar Museum preserving it and using it as the heart of a new campus is the highest and best use.
The plans are for it to become our new visitor center and our new car barns.
We want to make it a streetcar operation because it would add, well, for one, it would be saving a historical building. For two, it would be giving us a place to separately store our antique equipment. We'd like to store those separately, the real old Baltimore cars, from the things that we can kind of beat on. The newer equipment is just more durable.
We would like to be able to have more of the cars on display for people to actually get on. Also to just keep them more preserved. We also need a larger event space because events are getting larger and larger all the time. We can't hold that many people here. So eventually we also want to be able to move the streetcars out when we have larger events so that if necessary we could take up, you know, a lot more space for very large corporate events, weddings, things like that.
The project right now is that the museum will take over all those buildings and rehabilitate them. The plan then will be to move the museum down to that end. We plan to build a new car barn alongside the Roundhouse so that we can move the fleet down there. This old car barn here is actually in a floodplain.
When the museum was first constructed in the 1960s, it was prior to the Environmental Policy Acts that related to things like floodplain management, flood risk mapping. The property where the museum's located is right in the middle of a floodplain. In fact, part of it's in the floodway. Well, that led to a 1979 Tropical Storm David, devastating the museum. There were 6 feet of water in the car house. The nearly new visitor center was flooded about 18 inches. Many cars were out of service. All were eventually repaired. But it really was a devastating effect on the museum.
We had a sewer line across Jones Falls opposite of the car house that clogged up. Eventually it let loose and it just sent a ball of water over across the Jones Falls, across Falls Road, into our car house. And I can remember coming down a couple days afterwards to start helping to clean up, and there was literally trout swimming in the puddles on Falls Road. So we kind of had dinner that night.
What we're trying to do to deal with those challenges are to move our main museum campus to the former Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad Roundhouse, which we would restore and repurpose as part of a multi-building new campus. One of the advantages, besides saving a historic structure, is that entire campus can be out of the 500-year floodplain, which would enable us to keep the collection safe for what we can foresee in the future. But flooding in the environment is really, the urban environment, it's been our biggest challenge. Sometimes the urban environment is our biggest asset, but it presents challenges.
One of these challenges with the urban environment being an unplanned drop-in from their neighbor, Freight Railroad CSX.
I was at home, at my home in Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden I got a phone call from Ed Amrine. CSX just derailed a train on the bridge. The only thing is, it's not on the bridge, it's on our substation.
From Sky Team 11, you can see 5 rail cars falling off a bridge onto Falls Road and a couple more hanging on, looking like they could fall at any time. While no one was hurt and a woman escaped serious injury in her car, the Baltimore Streetcar Museum suffered major damage, including more than 500 feet of downed wires, pieces of rail broken all the way through, and this substation, which powers the cars, was destroyed.
Several years back, when one of the trains derailed on the bridge, fell onto Falls Road, destroyed our substation building, did not destroy the equipment, but destroyed the building, destroyed our overhead wire, and shut us down for about a year.
My husband's cousin was actually down here. She almost got hit by the train. So that was a very interesting afternoon because, you know, Justin and I were like, what happened? You know, she's calling, Justin, the train just fell on top of me, like not literally on top of her, but that's how she was terrified. It had actually hit her car, and so we were one of the first ones to actually know about it.
I'm just glad it happened on a weekday when we weren't running streetcars. Of course, it crushed the building, but miraculously the substation was undamaged. The streetcar gods must have been watching over us, because the building itself was crushed, but all the mechanical stuff was left unharmed.
While NCTM didn't have the problem of a neighboring railroad literally dropping in to say hi, they were located in an area with no former railroad facilities or right-of-way.
This construction began in '65, and the first thing that they did was build one of the barns. And so one of the challenges was that even after the barns were built, the museum still didn't have enough space for all of the cars. So that when the Washington cars did come out here, they were actually stored outside for a while, even after the building was built. The original museum was done largely with volunteer help. There was, some professional and contractor help done, but I mean, a lot of the cost and the construction and things like that were kind of held up by the museum members themselves. So it was, they probably couldn't have built a much larger museum if they had foundation money or grants or things like that. Well, so the museum did have a barn fire in September of 2003, and that was really devastating because there were 8 cars that were lost in the fire, so it was about half of the collection at the time. The museum itself was only closed for about 3 weeks, and then we reopened and continued to operate at that location for a few more years. But the other big challenge for us was moving from our old location to our current location, which occurred over a couple of years. The main challenge was that we were doing this because of the construction of the inter-county connector. So, for us, it was coordinating the removal of all of our streetcars. All of the streetcars came up here on trucks, so they weren't operated up here under electric wire. They had to be brought in on a truck and then offloaded into the barns, and it would be another probably year or so before tracks would actually connect to the railroad. So the other challenge was also really convincing people that the museum itself hadn't closed permanently, because people thought that either after the fire or after we closed for the inter-county connector that we had closed for good. So we've spent a number of years trying to let people know that we're still open. So where I'd like to see the museum in the next 25 to 50 years is really to start to grow the museum as a place where people can come and do research on the history of streetcars. We just recently acquired the library of a former transportation consultant official who worked in the industry for over 50 years, which has effectively doubled the size of our library and our archive. So I'd really like to see the museum kind of grow into a place where people can come and do research on streetcars and transit history. They could also come and kind of have experience, lectures and speakers that can talk about history and transportation, and then also get a number of our current fleet restored so that we can also have more cars to operate and have available to the public.
I'd like to see it be, the type of place that not only do people want to visit, but people want to have their events there. It's the place for everyone. I'd like to see more volunteers in more roles, because we have quite a few operators, and we have some people that do other things like restoration, but we don't have a lot of people that focus on fundraising for the museum or anything like that. It'd be nice if we had more of that kind of growth as well.
We're continuing to tell the story of public transportation, particularly in Baltimore, but elsewhere. We're looking at what it would take down the road to conserve a pair of the Metro subway cars, and not just get them, but make them an exhibit, make them an educational exhibit, like an educational space. We're looking to continue to work with finding, when I say better homes within our own assets for our rubber-tired collection. We have a bus collection that's representative of almost the entire history of rubber-tired public transportation in Baltimore. We're also very excited about a neighborhood development proposal, which is in the works for the properties immediately to the north of the Roundhouse site along Falls Road. And we're in discussions to see the Streetcar Museum possibly extend a little short distance, a block or two, to this new area and become a means of access for recreational facilities. We look to continue to refine our collection. As I mentioned, the subway cars eventually will acquire an MTA light rail car when they're retired, primarily for static display. There are other examples of cars, a few. If they're not Baltimore, they'll represent types that we can operate, such as a light rail vehicle, such as another vehicle that's wheelchair accessible. And we're in discussions to selectively acquire a few more of the remaining Baltimore cars, which are not presently in the collection. First of all, I'd encourage you to visit. You may say, why? There's a lot of museums. There's a lot of, railroad themed or transportation themed exhibits. Why visit us? We offer something truly unique. We tell the story of urban public transportation in the broader context, how it developed the city of Baltimore, as well as examples how it developed our country nationally. I encourage people to come and see what we offer. We're a small, relatively small organization, but we have so much here, and we have such a bright future. We're learning how to partner with others, how to be part of something larger. This isn't just the world's largest collection of electric trolleys, or somebody's private electric train set. This is a living history experience. Today we have 73 active volunteers, which for an organization of about 280 people, it's roughly 24%. That's pretty impressive. And I think we're doing well. We've grown our volunteer base over the past year particularly, and we continue to grow it because we offer those hands-on opportunities. We have volunteers that help us write grants, that help us do the administrative work. It's for a positive cause, it's for a community cause. And there's that opportunity waiting here. It's fun, it's a tight-knit group. We celebrate things as a volunteer team, and we really want people to be a part of it and experience the joy that our volunteers have.
And I also invite people to come out on Saturdays. We're open from noon to 5 every Saturday. So just come out and take a streetcar ride, and we can meet some of our volunteers who will be happy to talk to you about the history of streetcars. If you'd like to learn more about volunteering, again, check out our website, but then also reach out to us. We have volunteer operators. We also have volunteers that work in our library and archives and in our education program. And we also have volunteers that do maintenance both on the streetcars themselves, but also kind of keeping the facility running too.
It's like it's model railroading on steroids, if you want to look at it that way. But it's something that you can do without a license, without having to make a living off.
And if you want to get trained in operating streetcars, we'll take care of that. If you've got mechanical expertise, the shop is always looking for people with mechanical expertise. A sad note, in the last year and a half, we lost 3 members that were really important in the mechanical end of maintaining these old vehicles. They had all the experience, they had a lot of knowledge, and they all passed away. So that's a big loss.
When I joined here in 1973, Mark Dawson and I joined at the same time. We became great friends, and we were called the kids from the older groups down here at the museum. Now we're the older kids. Well, unfortunately Mark is gone, but I'm worried. What happens after I'm gone from here? I watched this place grow, I helped it grow, and I don't want to see it die. And as long as we have our younger members and great members, I think we're going to be fine.
Even though they always say we need volunteers, operators and people to restore the streetcars, we need so many other things. And I happened to mention one thing that I liked, and now I'm in charge of the events down here. Because I love planning events, and that's all I had to mention one day, and then I was in charge of it. So I'd say don't be afraid to offer services and things that you're passionate about, not just what the museum says it needs.
Just do it. No one is going to say no. If you're just trying to lend a helping hand and you're listening to what people are saying and you're not being destructive or you're not being offensive or rude, it's not going to be awful. It's not going to be this, antisocial fear that a lot of people have where they'll go up and, hey, can I please help? And the answer is no. No, we need help desperately. And we would appreciate your help.
Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. Ding, ding, ding went the bell. Zing, zing, zing went my heartstring. For the moment I saw her I fell. Chunk, chunk, chunk went the motor. Bump, bump, bump went the brake. Thump, thump, thump went my heartstrings. When she smiled, I could feel the car shake. I I tip my hat